You're listening to the Road to Wisdom podcast, weaving stories told by wonderful minds about all things motherhood, health, intimacy, politics, nature, and everything in between.
Join us on an adventure discovering unique experiences that we can learn from to enhance the ways in which we live.
We are your hosts, Chloe
and Keshia. All right, so welcome, Elizabeth. Thank you so much for joining us on the Road to Wisdom podcast today. We are so grateful to have you because both of us actually, between us, we have 8 children, and we often get the question, do you put sun cream on your children? And we don't, neither of us do. I don't know how much research you've done, Chloe, but I did it more from an instinctual place. I felt like when my kids didn't need any sun anymore, their pink skins told me so, and we would just get out of the sun rather than using sun cream. But it's something that we've questioned for a while. And
wow, how good! Great.
Yeah,
I am impressed.
Thank you. Yeah, and I think it's so great to have you on because we can actually talk about the nitty-gritty and the research, which you seem to have dedicated a lot of your time to, explaining why sun cream shouldn't be used. So, but yeah, we would love to get into why would we use sun cream in the first place? What was the intention behind that?
Well, we've always, throughout history, I mean, the ancient Egyptians used a grain that protected them, and the Indians on the islands, Cuba and all those areas, the Indians would put paint on them. They put dirt on them to protect their skin. So we've always kind of tried to protect ourselves from the sun rays. So, and now we've got this huge fear of melanoma. And it's amazing because my research shows that using the sunscreen actually increases the risk of melanoma. When you look at a graph of melanoma and what it was doing before sunscreens, and it just started taking off after sunscreens were introduced. And it makes all the sense in the world because there's a lot of rays besides just the UVB that causes a sunburn. There's the UVA and then infrared. And those are all coming down on our skin. And when we block the UVB and we stop the sunburn, we sit in the sun 2, 3, 4 hours longer. And so then all those other radiations are penetrating into our body, causing the melanoma. So the whole idea is absurd, and they're making millions of dollars off of it and destroying the oceans worldwide and harming us. They really do harm us on an astronomical level. I just, when I told my husband screens, he goes, "You're a hormone specialist. How can you do a book on sunscreen?" And I didn't know I had to be a total hormone specialist to describe what these chemicals are doing. Potent anti-testosterones, potent. And so then the young male fetus is developing with anti-testosterone. When he needs the testosterone, his young little testicles are making so that the brain is bathed in testosterone while it's developing. And that's not happening anymore. So our young boys aren't developing masculine characteristics.
Wow. And this is from the use of sunscreens. So could you explain to us which chemicals in sunscreens are causing these effects in our offspring?
All of them. I'm sorry. They really are. They're just the hormonally active ones. There's 16 sunscreen chemicals that are approved in the United States. And very hormonally active, very anti-testosterone. And then they've got the ones that are the zinc oxide and titanium dioxide. And those are they're destroying sea life.
Wow.
So what's the reason that they're saying that it's the sun and global warming and climate change killing all the coral, when it kind of seems like it could be obvious that it's something else?
Chemicals
like a
that
chemical
we're slathering on.
Yeah. What I'm trying to say is, have they actually tested or looked at the effects of sunscreen on coral reefs?
Yes, absolutely. Well, they've tested the individual chemicals on specimens of coral from different oceans around the world. And so they just put the chemical in the water that the coral's in, and the coral's dead in 96 hours. It's staggering to me that this has been allowed to happen for so long without recognition that we are the ones killing the coral. And the reason I got into this, I learned to scuba dive 50 years ago, and I feel very blessed I got to see the gorgeous coral down there. It's a wonder. It's absolutely used to be spectacular. And then my sister had a place in Hawaii, so I was there year after year after year, and I saw the coral beginning to die. And one year I was there, it's about 12 years ago now, I was there and I tried to force myself into the water, and it's so cold. I'm inching down into it. I've got goosebumps all over me. I am so cold, colder than I've ever felt in the 20, 30 years I swam there. And I came out, and the headline in the paper was, "Are corals dying due to global warming?" And I'm standing there with goosebumps all over me going, this is not. So my research brain, I'd already written several books, and my research brain wanted to figure out why. So because I love the coral, I want to figure out how to save it. And I immediately found the studies that showed that the sunscreen chemicals kill the coral in 96 hours immediately. I mean, it's there. The evidence is there. And I'm hearing that your Great Barrier Reef is really in bad shape in a lot of places. And it's a shame that that's going down. And what happened in Hawaii, it's a smaller, the islands are smaller, and they closed off the beaches and wouldn't allow people to swim. And the coral that had been dying during the 2 years of the closure, they started recovering by themselves. So if we'll stop putting the chemicals in the water, our corals will recover. And it's important that we do.
We just came back from the Great Barrier Reef, and there were actually signs telling the tourists not to wear sun cream on the boat. And I was, a bit shocked actually, because it was a big company and you'd think they'd be promoting sun cream. But they were telling tourists not to wear the sunscreens when they were jumping off the boat. So it's really interesting, because obviously this information isn't filtered through to parents who are looking after their kids and thinking that the sun is so dangerous. And especially here in Australia, it is pretty rough in summer. You can get burnt quite easily. But yeah, parents aren't told, hey, these sun creams are actually quite dangerous for your kids. They're being told the sun is, and just make sure you continue slathering on these zincs and creams to make sure that you don't get damaged.
When in reality, those chemicals are damaging our kids horrendously. Absolutely. The one chemical that they have determined is in 95% of Americans' blood supply. 95% of our bodies have that chemical, even in those who never use sunscreen, because it's now in our water, it's in our lakes, it's in our rivers, it's in our water supply, and it doesn't come out with filters. So, and that is one that's highly
Which chemical is that?
The benzophenone 3.
And the benzophenone 3, is that how it's pronounced, is causing the hormonal changes in our children.
But there's 12 of them are causing the hormonal changes, but that one is so prevalent that it's in 95% of us, even those who didn't use sunscreen.
So for us who live in Australia, it's very indoctrinated that if you don't wear sunscreen, you will get sun cancer, and they can cause death. And so if someone like us who, I've often said many times that sunscreen is just not something I believe in, and I just don't think that it's it's a ticket to just go and hang out in the sun all day and there be no consequences. And I have a method of sun protection that I prefer, but not many people are on board with that or have listening ears or willing to listen, because we are so heavily indoctrinated to believe that the sun is actually harmful for us. And so to hear that the sunscreen is just hormonally challenging for our children and for us and is actually quite dangerous for us, that's all good and well. But what is the alternative?
Food. Which it's food. So the solar radiation coming down is oxidation into our bodies. So we need a lot of antioxidants to combat the damage. And it really works so well. I have a whole chapter in my one book that's, I don't know if you can, I have a whole chapter in this book, Sunscreens Biohazard, Treatise Hazardous Waste. And it's amazing. I was surprised by how much research had already been done in this area, because that's all we need. The antioxidants that we eat actually rise up in the skin and form a protection from the solar radiation coming in. And I've spoken to several people, very white people, Irish, white. One woman said that she would blister in 15 minutes in the Mexican sun, which probably close to where you are there in a lot of places in Australia. And she showed me her arm. I had given her a lecture. She came up to me her arm, and it was just natural color. And she said, I was in Mexico for 2 weeks. I had a high antioxidant diet, and this is all that happened. I was totally protected. And we need the antioxidant diet to protect us from all the wireless, from all the cell phones, all the smart meters. It's the same oxidation damage. So the antioxidant diet protects us from both our stupidity of all the electronics that we're being exposed to and all the cell towers and smart meters, and then protects us from the sun. But we need the sun. We really do. I'm 80 years old, and when I had my first son, the hospital said, undress him, take him out, put him in the sun and rotate him like a spit because he needs the sun. I mean, this is how far we've come from saying, oh, the sun is dangerous, just in a couple decades. Well, I guess more than a couple decades.
I know. Now, instead of that, what they do is tell you to give your child to a machine of blue light, and they stick your kid under this awful blue light when really you could just put your child in the sun to help with the jaundice.
Absolutely. Yes. Yes. Yeah. I had a jaundiced child and had to keep taking her out and rotating her in the sun.
And it helps.
Much safer than all of our man-made electricity. Is far worse than the sunlight.
So in terms of diet as well, I have a bit of knowledge in this area myself, and I know there's foods that would probably contribute to burning of the skin, like seed oils and things like that. What is your understanding of that?
So, well, I really promote what's in my book, this whole chapter, because it's all proven in the studies. Studies are in that chapter. It's a huge chapter. Lots of studies, lots of foods, tremendous amount of foods. And I've got them in alphabetical order in the end of the book. So it's astaxanthin is one great thing. At least in America, I assume you can there. And it's what the plants make to protect themselves from the sun. And so it's very, very potent and very protective. So if people just take that, actually that's all they need, but still you need the whole plethora of all the green, leafy green vegetables, all the reds, all the purples, all the colors.
And in whole food form, I would imagine, not as extracts or powders or supplements. I feel like eating those foods in the whole food form is what helps us with the protective properties of them.
Absolutely. Well, I agree there. The problem is trying to get whole foods that are whole foods. You know, our farming, I have given up on blueberries here in America because, first of all, they don't taste like blueberries. So you know they've got pesticides even though they're sold as organic. So I've given up on eating foods because we can't get good food anymore. It really, I don't know. You probably can get better food there.
Yeah, we're very lucky.
And I wrote the second book on sunscreens because I was asked to write a article for a health journal, and I thought, well, I'll just look up. It's been 5 years since I wrote my book. I'll just look up to see what's new. And I was so horrified about the zinc and titanium dioxide being just shoved, saying, oh, you don't absorb it, which is absolutely. I have pictures of the zinc and titanium inside cells, inside the nucleus of the cells. And they say we don't absorb it. We absolutely do absorb it. So it's all wrong, which is just really sad.
Elizabeth, just really quickly, should we be afraid of being in the sun without sunscreen? Like, should we be worried that if we don't put sunscreen on us or our children that they will get skin cancer? Like, is that the deciding factor, whether or not we're wearing sunscreen?
That's the fear that they've put into people. And my editor that edited both my sunscreen books, over 400 references in there detailing how they don't work, how they're wrong, how they hurt. And the editor, a week after my second book went to publish, she calls me and she goes, I just watched a commercial and we've got to use sunscreen. And I'm like, here, she had all that evidence she'd been reading for a couple of years. And the commercials are so tailored to get you to believe what they're trying to sell you. It's just because actually we need the sun. We need the sun more than what they're saying about the possibility of melanoma and skin cancers. But I've been in the sun my whole life. My family got a boat when I was 5. And when I was 5, 75 years ago, there was no sunscreen. And we were out in the boat all day, all weekend. And so it just, it makes no sense to put this much fear into people. And it's a tragedy. And part of it is because they're making so many millions of dollars off sunscreen.
Actually, I have heard you speak on sunscreen, and forever I have thought that sunscreen is a skincare product. But the way you talk about it being a pharmaceutical product, it definitely switched the conversation for me, because when you think of it as a pharmaceutical product, well, pharmaceuticals always come with side effects and risks, whereas skincare has never really had that heavy alternative side to it. So I think, when we refer to sunscreens as a pharmaceutical rather than as a skincare, it switches the conversation up, and I guess would encourage other people to ask more questions.
And I guess at the moment in Australia, there are a whole body of people who have realised that they're actually applying toxic chemicals to their bodies and then going out into the sun, which kind of accelerates the damage element. And so now people are really into natural sunscreens, but they still have those zinc dioxides and other ingredients like that. So are they any better?
No, they're not. And that's why it became a second book for me. I was so horrified at the evidence of the damage and how harmful they are. And when you see pictures of these little pieces of the zinc or titanium inside, it goes into the brain. It travels everywhere. And our bodies aren't designed to handle these little tiny pieces of metal. They're really, they say, oh, we're all natural, we're all mineral. Well, it's...
Yeah. And I think also I've heard you speak on your sun exposure not being from 0 to 100, being like exposing your body to the sun through spring, maybe even where we are towards the end of winter, so that when summer does roll around, you've had a high antioxidant diet, you've been building up this tolerance to the sun as well, building your melanin, and which would also help with the protection side of things.
Yes, well, that's my understanding too, is that UVB exposure actually creates melanin, and it's kind of like an inbuilt sun protection mechanism that we have inside our bodies. And then when we expose ourselves to the spectrum of the sunset, that actually our bodies have an innate capability and knowledge to repair any of the cellular damage caused by the sun during the day. And so, it'd be awesome for you to chat to us about the building up of the callus naturally, and if that's a smart and safe thing to do for our children and for ourselves during summer.
Absolutely, because melanin, that tanning that our bodies do naturally, that melanin is the best sun protection we can have for our skin. So our bodies are already creating the best protection for us naturally, as long as we gradually introduce the sun every summer.
How would you recommend building that callus safely?
So just, go out like early morning, like 10 o'clock in the morning, and go out for 10, 15 minutes. And then, every day just build up more and more time. My kids that I had were here in California. Of course, we don't have your Australian sun, but here in California, by the end of summer, they were this like little brown bears, because their skin had created so much tanning for them. And then the tan, somehow the body remembers it more and can tan faster the next year. I really noticed that. I noticed that in myself.
So for us in Australia, there's a lot of fear around melanoma and skin cancer. How could we diffuse some of that fear with a little bit of logic and fact around, if sun isn't causing cancer, if sun isn't the main factor for getting a melanoma, what is?
I'd like to give you another study about the melanoma. It's a great study. They looked at sailors on a ship and looked at those that had the inside jobs and then those that had the outside jobs. And those that had the outside job, where they're out in the sun all the time, had less melanoma than the ones that had the inside jobs, because they didn't get the sunshine. We absolutely need it. We need the vitamin D, and so it's really hard to overcome the incredible assault of years of programming, because it's been program. I just, like, when my editor called me and said, "Oh, we have to use sunscreen," I'm like, that's how, they monitor, they build those commercials to make that sale.
Why aren't the researchers looking at this, the scientists looking at this research and calling it out as a chemical problem as opposed to a climate problem?
Boy, that is an incredible question, because why are they saying cell phones are okay? Because it's obvious they're not. They're very damaging. They're causing cancers. They're harming us on such a level. And yet the international organizations are saying there's no known effect. It's absolutely mind-boggling to me when there are thousands of articles now showing how it's causing cancers, how it's causing brain cancer, how it's causing breast cancer. And so it's the same problem, that the industry with the money are the ones that dictate what the research shows. And this is a problem across the board on all kinds of things.
Yes, we've really seen that. It seems to be a common theme that really shows up for majority of the topics that we speak about, is that it's like there's a war on anything that's good for us. And if you try to say, hey, I actually don't think that's true, you look like a lunatic. So I'm glad.
We also see these big businesses that are flourishing, and it opens up new industry when we have something like climate change, because we've got this industry of technology that's going to help stop climate change, and so many stories and narratives that promote that many more businesses to flourish and create new ideas to stop and save, when we can really pare it back and bring it back to nature and bring it back to, you know what? If you've been out in the sun, your skin, being a beautiful receptive indicator, is going to go pink and tell you to get out of the sun. But if you stop that from happening, you're getting excessive exposure to the sun, and all of a sudden all you've stopped is the messaging to tell you to get out of the sun, which I believe also this burning and then peeling is getting rid of any damaged cells. So now we've completely removed the mechanism of removing the damaged cells. We're keeping the damaged cells because we've flogged off that process. And I can see how that would lead to more cancer, more melanoma, more issues and DNA damage down the road. So
I guess because, like all things, it's much easier to ignore the obvious. And the obvious would be like, hey, I'm sorry, I know it's summer. It's a really fun time. We love hanging out at the beach all day as Australians, especially in the middle of the day. It's very fun. You can't do that anymore. You can only go in the mornings and you can only go in the afternoon. I'm very sorry. But it seems like there's that, like all things that we talk about, there's a false sense of hope, or the shifting of responsibility. If we just put on sunscreen, we'll be okay.
We can save you. We can save you from the burn. We can save you from the evil sun. We'll just give you this chemical and you can stay out in the sun for as long as you like. We see it on the water too. Anywhere that there is a whole congregation of tourists mainly, you can see it in the water. Like there is a film on top of the water, and it's awful.
It can't be good. It's not rocket science. I don't even think you have to be a clinical researcher to just look at it and observe it with your eyes and think, is this good? Is this what nature intended? Probably not.
Very good. You're totally right.
And I think
I love you too. I just find this so.
Yeah, well, it's something definitely to think on, and I feel like hopefully we're on the right track, stripping it back down to how nature intended it, and working with our environment, including the sun, and allowing our body to indicate to us when we've had enough sun, and until that point, getting out in it as much as possible, because we need that information. Our
I
body
think it's
needs
just
it.
understanding the sun and your relationship to it. Like my personal understanding, because I'm a bit of a nerd when it comes to like quantum biology and circadian rhythms, is that obviously getting up in the morning and exposing our eyes to the first light, the first, hour or so, and then also the same in the afternoon, and not being under artificial light, and making sure we're synthesizing enough vitamin D from the sun, not from ridiculous supplemental form. It is not responsible to be out in the middle of the day over summer, all day, every day, and then, going from zero sun to full sun. Not applying those chemicals or oils onto our skin. Obviously the nutritional aspect of protecting from the inside out. And fearing the sun is going to get us nowhere.
I'd love to ask you a question, Elizabeth, because we do have these chemicals in our oceans. Eating fish would probably be one of the foods that would help protect you from sun exposure with the antioxidants in fish oils. However, if you've got sunscreen in the water, is this affecting our fish that we eat?
It absolutely is. And I was poisoned with mercury 22 years ago. And at that point, I had to quit eating fish because of all the mercury in the fish. It made me very sick. I couldn't eat it after that. And then when I did all the research and found all these sunscreen chemicals are in the muscles of the fish. So we would wind up eating all these chemicals. And so we actually don't eat fish anymore at all. And that's kind of hard to tell you in Australia, where I think fish is probably a good portion of I would think fish is a good portion of your diet. So, but I just choose not to put those chemicals in my body.
Is there any fish that you would think are not affected by sunscreen?
No, because they're all swimming in the water, and it's throughout the whole water.
Whew.
I wonder if they because there is obviously in, relation to that idea that meat, like cows who eat certain things, or, like grain specifically, and how that's synthesized and how we eat that. Obviously, there is argument that it's not good for us because they eat a diet that's not biologically correct. But there is also argument that they can kind of synthesize the drugs and things that are given to them in factory farming, and it doesn't affect us. So I wonder if fish can also synthesize in a way. Like, is there any research to suggest that there is like a filter mechanism?
I haven't looked into that. I really haven't. So, but it's a good idea. It really is.
I feel like if we look back at what you said earlier, Elizabeth, where coral reefs that were blocked off from tourists were able to regenerate because they didn't have sunscreen in the water, we could probably take that logic to areas that aren't exposed to tourists and that kind of high level of chemical exposure, and the fish probably have a bit of a detox. And that was another question that we'd love to ask you, Elizabeth. Is there a way to detox from sunscreen? Because I have heard you speak on spray-on sunscreens, and while I don't use sunscreen on my family, we've gone to touristy areas, vacation areas where people are spraying this stuff, and if you're downwind, like cigarette smoke, you're like, oh God, how do I stop this from getting into my airways, my kids' airways? So if we've had that exposure, is there a way to detox from it?
I think we need to detox from everything that's coming at us. I mean, it's not just the sunscreen. It's, it's all the chemicals that we're breathing all in the cars and stuff like that. So I think just a regular detoxing diet, continuous detoxing diet to just constantly help clean out the liver and the kidneys and the skin. So I think it has to be a way of life in today's world.
We actually did have a couple of questions from our listeners, and one was on the topic of sun allergy. Is having a sun allergy a thing?
Absolutely, and it usually comes from being toxic, from having heavy metals. After my mercury poisoning, I had a hard time for a year or two where I had a very difficult time being in the sun because my skin would react so strongly. But it doesn't do that anymore. So it's definite. It's a definite reality, and it's mostly because of toxins in us. And a lot of us, I don't know if you do the mercury silver fillings for teeth in Australia.
We do them, but we don't participate.
Oh, good. Yes. But I mean, my parents filled us with mercury fillings because that's what they did, especially during the Second World War when there wasn't much money. But so the problem is that a lot of people have mercury poisoning from the fillings because whenever you drink hot liquid, they vaporize. When you chew, they vaporize. So the mercury is going through your body all the time. And and that mercury in the body makes people more sensitive to the sun, more sensitive to anything.
So would that just be heavy metals in general? So if somebody's experiencing a sun allergy, is it correct to say that these people probably have a high toxic load and would probably be better off addressing their heavy metals to relieve some of that allergy to the sun?
Absolutely. Yeah, and plus for their overall health. I constantly, it's 22 years ago now where I was poisoned, but I know I still have effects of mercury in my body. I know that. It's very difficult to get rid of. I'm allergic to what they use to get rid of it, so I can't use it. So it's been a long, slow process. But of just eating good foods and constantly antioxidants to help clear the body.
Yeah, wow. And I think that's probably another lesson that people can learn from their bodies. If you are allergic to the sun or highly sensitive to it, there is another issue there that you need to address, because that's not how you should be
Responding to the sun.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, amazing. Well, it definitely sounds like we should not be afraid of the sun so much and kind of shift the thought on how you can actually have a positive and healthy relationship to the sun for your own benefit.
And for the benefit of our environment.
Exactly. And I mean, I personally know many people who have had a melanoma and had surgery to have them removed, or told that could have been quite deathly for them. And I always thought like it was gospel, like it was true, that if you get sun, you're in the sun so much, you'll basically get a skin cancer and die. But as I've gotten older and I've kind of exposed myself to other ideas and concepts, I've looked at, kind of looked back on those people, and I've realized that a lot of them are people who are incredibly afraid of the sun, constantly wearing protection, sunglasses, hats, long sleeves, full sleeve swimmers. They typically work indoors. They don't particularly see a lot of sun, like school teachers, doctors, people who drive transport. So they're in cars all the time, with glass blocking the spectrum of full light. And so, yeah, it is interesting to observe that, those people who bake and are just wrinkly and brown, they don't have sun cancer. But, it's just it's an interesting observation, and I'm not saying that I'm right. I don't know what I'm talking about, but just to think about it logically and observe. I mean, it's not rocket science.
That's right. Yeah. Well, they figured out when we started making cities and industrialized in the cities and people coming to the cities and staying in the cities. They realized that they were getting rickets because they didn't get enough vitamin D, and because they were no longer in the sun to create their own vitamin D. And we need the sun to make our own vitamin D. And so they started putting vitamin D in foods, supplementing it in bread and things like that. So yeah, we were so well designed. We really were. We came onto this planet and have experienced so many backup systems and safeguards.
Oh no, I was actually just thinking too. I mean, with everything we've gone through over the last few years, one of the predicting factors of whether you would have a hard time with a certain disease that was out there was your vitamin D levels. And it's interesting that information came out quite early, that those with higher vitamin D levels were actually better protected from, I'll say it, COVID. But then the guidelines from our governing bodies were to stay inside and stay home, and you weren't allowed to be out in the sun, and you couldn't even go to the beaches, and you got 1 hour out of your house. So yeah, I feel like if that's any indication of how much we should trust our governing bodies, who are also pushing sunscreen, there's a lot of questions to be answered.
Yeah, there's a lot of misinformation in our medical community and in the government. It's staggering. I am very grateful. I'm a clinical laboratory scientist, and it takes years and years and years in California, where I live, to do all this, the studying, all the years of study. And then you intern for a year, just like a doctor, with no pay, and you work till 2 a.m. and get back on the hospital floors at 6 a.m. I mean, it's horrendous, absolutely horrendous process. But I'm very grateful for it, because that's what allows me to have the background in the biochemistry to write my books and do the studying. But at the time that I finally realized that laboratory tests don't really work, after all that work, decades, and I was really disappointed that I spent that much time. But now I'm very grateful, because I can write my books on sunscreen. I can write my books on hormones and help people understand the truth, because there's very little truth coming out in the medical community today. Western medicine is so off base on so many things. I give whole talks on that, because they do not understand how beautifully orchestrated our bodies are, and how our organs are critically important. Our tonsils, our appendix, our uterus and ovaries, they're all critically important. They're not expendable. And the doctors, the medical community has been thinking that, oh, well, if you have a little problem, we'll just take them out. And our bodies really suffer. I act as a menopause consultant, and I'm staggered at how harmed women's bodies have been from the surgeries they've had.
Elizabeth, you just mentioned something that I'm curious about. You mentioned that you spent a decade or so just to understand. You mentioned that lab testing doesn't work. Are you referring to when we go and get a blood test to look at markers like our vitamin D or iron or, ferritin or any of those things? Is that what you're referring to as you think that they don't work?
Sadly, I think they're approximations. They're not something to really follow. The doctors are using them to really follow the numbers, but they're approximate. And hormones are 40% off. One of the reasons there's a fight over whether it should be a saliva sample or blood sample or urine sample, is because they all use the same tests, and the tests are 40% off. They can't get more accurate. So you might as well flip a coin. I have been doing menopause consulting for over 20 years, and I can't tell you how many women have found me that I have a 6-page profile. I haven't filled out a questionnaire of how they're feeling because I go by symptoms, because that's what doctors used to use before these stupid lab tests. Sorry, they're just doctors are relying on them way too much to think that they're going to give them a value and to act on it and to change whatever they're doing based on that value.
I've actually always wondered if a blood test, so if we're trying to investigate something like
Iron in pregnancy.
Let's use it as an example because it's such a controversial one. But I've always had this feeling that when you go to get a blood test, you're really just capturing a split moment in time, and your body is constantly expressing itself and doing something different throughout the day, the weeks, the cycle, everything has this nature that works the way it works. And I've always thought it was just bizarre that we could just take blood in a snapshot moment and think that we can understand what's happening inside our bodies, and then you need 500 milligrams of iron every day, or like you need an infusion right now, or your baby's going to die if you don't, like just these massive claims. Is that, am I off, or is that something that is a little bit correct?
No, I am very much in support of what you just said. And I wish I had those thoughts before I spent all those decades in all the learning, because you're right. You really are right. And the thing that I was just is that a woman can't produce milk if she's got high copper, if she's got normal amount of copper. And so we have been monitoring copper towards the end of pregnancy, and it's low because the body automatically makes it low so the mother can produce the milk. We need copper. Yeah. And so we've been giving copper to these women right when they're starting to nurse, when the body totally knew to back off on the copper. It's staggering how marvelous our bodies are made, and our Western medicine doesn't recognize it.
Is that the same with iron as well? Because I think iron's something that we are told, it's a massive focus in Australian clinic. I know, I'm not sure about America, but in Australia, iron's a really big focal point in pregnancy. And, as per guidelines, it needs to be really high all the time. And yet the majority of women present with low or wavering iron levels throughout their pregnancy. And it's become, normal, so to speak, to have a dip in iron. And that's when they test, and they want women to be getting infusions. They want, it's like a drive. Like, I need the iron up.
I was just going to mention, like, it's so important here, iron levels, that if you're planning to have a home birth, your midwife can't support you with an iron level that is below, I'm not quite sure what the figure is, but yeah, they often will threaten women that they can't be supported in a home birth with low iron. So it's really like driven to be higher, and they only can test that with blood tests. And it's a shame because you could be feeling great, which would probably indicate that your iron's okay. But if your if your test comes back a bit low, they do like to push infusions or supplementation or any of these things. So I always wonder and I think this is what you're getting to, like what the effects of that could be downstream. Like, would that affect your milk supply at all?
I don't know. I only just ran across this information about copper just in the last week or two.
Oh, wow.
And I'm in awe of our body. It just like, our body knows to reduce the copper as we get close to nursing, and our medical community doesn't understand it. There's so much our medical community really doesn't understand.
We always find out these things after the fact, after we've done years of intervention, and then, we figure out, oh shit, shouldn't have done that. That last 20 years shouldn't have been prescribing that medication,
right,
or shouldn't have been intervening with the birth that way,
right,
or whatever it is. And so I like to try and put that into the realm of decision making when it comes to what tests to do, what supplements to take, what interventions to have. So well, Elizabeth, thank you so much for coming on.
I just wanted to say I would like to wait 20 years after anything that's introduced, because it takes 20 years to figure out if this is really true or not. And so whenever there's something new, I say, okay, we'll keep researching.
Oh, that's wise. That is wise. Well, thank you so much, Elizabeth. Again, it's been so amazing having you here. Could you please tell our listeners where to find you and also your books?
Best EMF products. We have several. Okay, here. This will work. If you can read that. So
perfect. We can get that, and we will
screenshot that.
Okay. Alrighty. Yeah. So we have a website for sunscreens and website for the EMF. And so we would love to help anybody. Be glad to answer any questions. Please email. Be glad to help out. And I am really excited about what you two are doing, because we need more wisdom in what's happening today.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Elizabeth. Well, we will link to all of those websites and to your books in the show notes. So if anyone needs some further information or research, they can go there and then, contact you if they have more questions.
Yeah, and if you can really help reduce sunscreen use around the Great Barrier Reef, that would be wonderful, because I haven't seen it yet. I would love to see it while it's so beautiful. So hopefully you can do that.
Oh, we'll give it our best.
We will. No pressure. All right. Thank you again, Elizabeth.
Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in to the Road to Wisdom podcast. To join the journey, you can follow us on Instagram at theroadtowisdom.podcast and at www.theroadtowisdompodcast.com. Don't forget to subscribe and leave a review. We look forward to seeing you next week with more juicy content.